Midterm preview. With 2 weeks until the election, we're in Arizona, a battleground state, with a look at the two candidates for a hotly contested Senate seat. Inside the Synod, a cardinal from South Africa joins us and tells us what's to be expected in the final document from the global meeting of bishops at the Vatican. Catholic in America. Exclusive numbers on how the media is covering church-related issues. And something old, something new. A glimpse of what it's like to be a young participant at the worldwide meeting of bishops. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, October 23rd, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump says Democrats are a big risk to the American family. 2 weeks away from critical midterm elections, he is in full campaign mode. Although he's not on the ballot, the president tells his supporters a vote for Republicans is a vote for Trump. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. Focusing on immigration, the president is stumping for Republican candidates as he speaks to conservatives across the country and makes friends with former enemies, all in an effort to get votes for his party. Every speech slamming Democrats. The president's stump speech hammers home the same message over and over again.
Democrats are willing to do anything and to hurt anyone to get their way. Democrats want to throw open your borders to deadly drugs and gangs.
In order to unify Republicans, an old rivalry during the 2016 campaign has become a new Make America Great Again alliance.
I am honored that President Trump is here endorsing and supporting my campaign, and I look forward to campaigning alongside him in 2020 for his re-election.
In Houston last night, President Trump carrying the baton for Ted Cruz in the midst of a tight Texas Senate race. Leaving no doubt in the Lone Star State, the president affirmed his loyalty to an America First agenda.
You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay?
The title includes opposing a caravan of thousands of Central American migrants on a journey through Mexico to reach the U.S. border. To rally Republican votes, the president claims conspiracy. The Democrats are funding the migrants' journey.
Do you know how the caravan started? Does everybody know what this means? I think the Democrats had something to do with it.
And without pointing to evidence, he also says unknown Middle Easterners and MS-13 gang members are mixed in with the group.
I believe in a fact-based reality.
Meanwhile, President Trump's predecessor is campaigning for Democrats with this message.
I don't believe in just making stuff up. I think you should actually say to people what's true.
Late today, without providing proof, President Trump said he has very good info that Middle Easterners are in that migrant caravan. Over on his Twitter feed, the president continues campaigning, trying to influence congressional races in places like New York, New Jersey, and Minnesota. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. Our Catholics in America poll finds immigration an important issue for just 13% of Catholic voters in the West. Right now, Arizona is heating up over a tight Senate contest, the race to replace retiring Senator Jeff Flake. Correspondent Jason Calvi joins us now from beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. I'm here in the heart of Arizona, where the Senate race here is bigger than the Grand Canyon state. It could help determine who takes control of the Senate. Two congresswomen are facing off: Democrat Kyrsten Sinema, Republican Martha McSally, and the Real Clear Politics average of polls has them neck and neck. Almost showtime for Kyrsten Sinema. The Democrat is the first member of Congress to say she has no religious affiliation. LGBT advocates say she shattered the lavender ceiling with her openly stated attraction to both men and women. She pitches herself as the bipartisan moderate Arizona wants.
I know that I will get stuff done.
But former Air Force fighter pilot Martha McSally is campaigning hard to land the Senate seat. The youngest of 5 children, McSally was valedictorian of her class at a Catholic school in Providence, Rhode Island. Now the retired colonel promises to get tough on immigration.
I'm working with President Trump to secure our border and keep Arizona families safe.
McSally wrote a bill with tougher penalties for those on the border who help guide people into the United States illegally. On immigration, Sinema was one of the few House Democrats to support bigger penalties for people deported multiple times. She says in the Senate, she would work for border security and citizenship for dreamers. The two candidates sparred on a range of issues in a debate last week.
Martha has a 98% voting record with her party and with her president, which I think demonstrates that she's not willing to do what's right for Arizona if the president's wrong on an issue.
McSally fired back.
I've gotten to know him over the last year and a half, and he loves America, and he is fighting for Americans every single day, and I'm going to keep working with him to provide more opportunities for all of us.
Democrats here in Arizona have not held the Senate seat since 1995, but this year, Democrats hope that they can rise triumphant from the flames of this hot race. Lauren?
Jason, you've been telling us about how pro-life groups are targeting these crucial battleground states that will determine the fate of the Senate. So what are they doing in Arizona?
They're doing exactly what we've profiled them doing in other states. They're knocking on doors. Susan B. Anthony List is out here, the Faith and Freedom Coalition. Both those pro-life groups are knocking on doors here in Arizona. And during the recent debate with Sinema, Martha McSally said she was in favor of defunding Planned Parenthood.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting from Phoenix, Arizona. Thank you, Jason. The Attorney General of the nation's capital launches a civil investigation into the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. Carl Racine is probing whether the Archdiocese violated the law by covering up the sexual abuse of minors. He also announced a new website for victims to report clergy misconduct. The Archdiocese issues a statement in response saying, in part, it, quote, is committed to meeting the needs of survivors of abuse and reporting such allegations to authorities. The Center for Family and Human Rights, known as CFAM, applauds President Trump's administration and its proposal to reverse Obama-era rules on gender.
It's not just that it's a more traditional understanding, it's also a legally understood understanding that there are categories of protection under law, one of which is sex. Gender does not appear in that list.
The New York Times said the Department of Health and Human Services wants to return to basic protections for men and women under the program known as Title IX. HHS won't confirm this report, saying everyone deserves to be treated with respect. Vice President Mike Pence says the United States will respond to the death of Saudi Arabian journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
President Trump has already expressed his concern that there have been lies, there's been deception. He dispatched the Secretary of State to the region early on, and the director of the CIA is there in Turkey now reviewing the evidence.
The vice president was speaking at an event hosted by the Washington Post where Jamal Khashoggi was a contributor. The writer was killed October 2nd at Saudi Arabia's consulate in Turkey. And Vice President Pence isn't the only one with harsh words. One policy expert speaking at the National Press Club in Washington laid the blame on Saudi Arabia, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
We've seen him launch a brutal war in Yemen, and he's been bullying countries around the world. And so an extraterritorial hit against a perceived opponent is not something that would have seemed completely unlikely.
The panel discussed how the writer's death should affect relations between the United States and Saudi Arabia. A security guard was shot and killed Sunday defending the residence of the retired Archbishop of Mexico City. Cardinal Norberto Rivera was home at the time but was unharmed. The incident is believed to have been an attempted robbery. Agence France Presse reports a second Catholic priest in France has committed suicide after being accused of sexual assault. Father Pierre-Yves Fumery was found Saturday. He was 38 years old. Another 38-year-old priest committed suicide last month following an allegation of misconduct. In Rome, a cardinal taking part on the Synod on Youth says he expects the final document to make reference to LGBT Catholics.
I should say my hunch is that it will be there. In what form and how it will be approached, I don't know. But I'm confident that it would be part of the document.
Cardinal Luis Tagle is the Archbishop of Manila. The Synod Fathers met today to discuss the first draft of the final document. Once they vote on it, it will be given to the Holy Father for consideration. Cardinal Wilfred Napier is Archbishop of Durban, South Africa. He's taking part in the Synod. Your Eminence, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for having me on your show.
The bishops received the final document today, and I understand you're studying it. We've been reporting that many youth were concerned about the issue of same-sex attraction and whether or not it would be addressed. Has it been?
It has been addressed in a very passing way, I would say. Simply mentioned that the sexual orientation and homosexuality are issues that have been discussed. But there's no great depth of study into it or any positions been taken on it.
Has the word LGBT been used?
Not as far as I've got in the document so far. And I think it's only wise that it doesn't get used because there are other groups of people who would need to be mentioned as well if you're making categories of people who have different positions or problems that need to be dealt with.
You've expressed concern that the final document may be too focused on issues of youth in Europe and the West. Are the voices, do you believe, of Africans being heard?
One of the great parts of the presentation this morning was the fact that the two special secretaries made the point of saying this document is for the whole church, but it can't go into detail for each and every part of the church, and therefore it will be up to the bishops' conferences or the regional bishops' conferences to actually supply the particular details of their area so that the document would have more relevance to their particular issues.
What are the issues that young people in your country, South Africa, are most concerned about? How do they differ from Europe and the West?
I think one of the main things where they differ would be certainly in the area of where they come from culturally, the traditional values, the family. In Europe we talk about the father, mother, and children as the family, and then we say the rest are extended family. In Africa, it would be a situation that the whole conglomeration is called the family. From grandparents down to the grandchildren is referred to as the family and not the extended family. That's one point that was made quite tellingly by one of the bishops from Africa. The other issues, of course, are unemployment, exploitation, the question of human trafficking, which is a very, very serious one in parts of Africa. The third one, I think, would be how, because of the poverty, many multinational companies are using cheap labor, using young people, children even, in order to exploit minerals and so on at the least cost to themselves. These are some of the issues that have been mentioned.
You've been supportive of Pope Francis amid allegations that he knew about Theodore McCarrick's sexual misconduct. What's your advice to Catholics who are disturbed by the allegations?
Every time I see a big debate going on in the media, the social media in particular, I say to myself, well, thank God I believe in Jesus Christ. I don't believe in Pope Francis or Cardinal so-and-so. I believe in Jesus Christ. And once I'm living that out, my faith in Jesus Christ, I'm trying to live his gospel, trying to pass his gospel on to others, that for me is the essence of my faith. Look, if there are problems going on, I leave it to, just as I do in my own diocese, if there's somebody assigned to look after a particular area of ministry, I don't go worrying about that particular ministry all the time. I leave them to take responsibility. And here at the Vatican, if there are departments that are responsible for that, I'm leaving it for them to deal with it properly and not to be keeping on worrying about whether the Pope knew or the Pope didn't know. If that's been brought to their attention and they're dealing with it, I think that's what matters most.
Cardinal Wilfred Napier, Archbishop of Durban, South Africa, thank you for joining us.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me to explain something of the African background and the African view of how the Synod has gone.
Coming up, our exclusive look at the media's coverage of church-related issues. And a Catholic priest gives us his ideas for overhauling seminaries. In tonight's Catholic in America segment, we look at News Nightly's exclusive analysis of media coverage of Catholic issues. With Kantar Media, we tracked leading national and local print, TV, and online media. Not surprisingly, one story obliterated every other story about the church: clergy sex abuse. Priest sex abuse coverage spiked on August 14th when a Pennsylvania grand jury report said 300 Catholic priests abused at least 1,000 victims over 7 decades. And it rose even higher the following week when Archbishop Carlo Vigano, the former papal nuncio to Washington, D.C., wrote a scathing letter implicating Pope Francis in knowing about a clergy sex abuse cover-up involving former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick. A Catholic priest and director of a seminary in New York says he has an idea how best to address clergy sex abuse, and it's an overhaul of seminaries. Joining me now is Father Thomas Berg, Director of Admissions at St. Joseph's Seminary in Yonkers, New York. Father Berg, welcome to the program.
Great to be with you, Lauren.
You write that, quote, "Many of our institutions have too often failed miserably in preparing men for ministry, and many still fall far short of the goal of forming happy, healthy, holy priests." Why then do you think it has taken so long to have this conversation about reform?
It's no secret that seminaries have failed in the past, that we're trying to get this right, but I think we have to act more proactively and with the bishop's involvement to see which seminaries are starting to get things right, which are not, and can we not pool our efforts better, pool our personnel, and really start more adequately preparing these men and addressing the issues that are very particular to the millennial seminarian, because that's who we're talking about, with their own set of issues. Mm-hmm.
Right. You suggest a minimum age, perhaps of 22 for men to begin seminary formation. How do you think that's going to help?
The men who are coming to us, frankly, so many of the men who are coming to us actually are quite mature. But I think in general, we run into this difficulty where maybe a couple years into formation, guys are really unsure. There's an insecurity level there that I think if a person is a little bit older, maybe has a little bit more experience being out there in life, working in the world, engaging still in formation activities in the diocese, continuing his discernment process, living a celibate lifestyle, that can't hurt. That can only help in a lot of cases.
Pope Francis has expressed a willingness to consider ordaining married men of proven virtue to address pastoral needs in parts of the world where clergy is scarce. Yet, you advocate prolonging the formation process.
I do. I think time is our friend, and it's just the reality of so many, again, of the young men who are presenting themselves as candidates today. They simply need more time. It's no secret that millennials do kind of extend that period where they're trying to find themselves. That, in a certain extent, also applies to our seminarians these days. So how bishops confront that, the gaps in manpower, well, that's certainly a challenge, and I certainly acknowledge that. But I don't think rushing men to ordination, and again, I don't mean to imply that most bishops are rushing, but I've seen it happen. I've seen overconfidence in candidates who seem to look really good and really set after 4 years. But then we get into the first few years of ministry and we run into difficulties, we run into challenges, and so I think time is our friend in that sense.
But I think what people are worried about is that there must not be, or there may be, but maybe it's not enforced, a clear sexual harassment policy and corresponding protocols. Do you have one? Is that true that they don't exist?
We certainly do at St. Joseph's Seminary. The vast majority of our seminaries are, if they haven't had them until recently, they're certainly being implemented. But that's something that, again, taking advantage of the moment, we have to make sure are in place.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, for writing this op-ed in the Washington Post. Father Thomas Berg, Director of Admissions at St. Joseph's Seminary in Yonkers, New York.
Thank you, Lauren.
Up next, That's the Ticket, a look at why lottery fever is gripping the U.S. And a glimpse of what it's like to be a young participant at the worldwide meeting of bishops. Lotto fever in the United States for tonight's $1.6 billion Mega Millions, it should be Mega Billion prize. It's the world's largest ever lottery jackpot. But don't quit your day job just yet. The odds of winning, 1 in 302.5 million. The author of a new book is encouraging men and women to take a look at the roles feminism and the sexual revolution have played in shaping today's culture. In her book, Sex Matters: How Modern Feminism Lost Touch with Science, Love, and Common Sense, author Mona Sharon writes, for decades, feminists have urged women to flee from what they love and who they are, and rigidly to copy men. It's terrible life advice. And joining me now is the author, Mona Sharon, Senior Fellow at Ethics and Public Policy Center, and the author of Sex Matters. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Women today have more opportunity than their mothers and their grandmothers, and yet you write that happiness is elusive to them and that it is not marched forward with feminism. Why do you believe the data show it hasn't?
That's absolutely right. This book traces the fact that while, yes, women have many more opportunities, and we're grateful for those opportunities, we've also lost a great deal because of the feminist changes and because of the sexual revolution. Women are much less secure now than they used to be.
Secure financially, emotionally, physically?
All of the above. There are millions more women struggling to do everything themselves, to raise kids, to work, to do all the tasks of a family without husbands. There are millions of women who would like to marry, but there aren't men that are marriageable because the men have been raised in fatherless homes and aren't stepping up and doing the things that men traditionally were able to do, to lead families and to be strong pillars of their communities. All of that is traceable to the changes that we saw with the sexual revolution and feminism both. I don't deny that feminism has done some good things, but I don't think that we have adequately grappled with the price we've paid.
But what do you say? What do you say to working mothers? And I know you were a working mother, and you also raised how many? 7?
3.
3. Sorry, wrong guess.
I wish.
I know, me too. As they balance career and family, that they set a good example for their daughters and their sons. And similarly, for women who divorce, you know, should they stay in a marriage where the husband is abusive or a drug addict or an alcoholic?
Look, you've raised tough questions. Everybody grapples with these hard cases. Certainly in a marriage where there's abuse or where there's real suffering, then sometimes the only answer is divorce. But so many, and I show this in the book, so many of the divorces that are happening in America now are not in those kinds of situations. It's really just that people are saying, well, I don't feel fulfilled, or they met someone new. That is not a good reason for a divorce, especially if there are children involved.
You say one of the solutions could be that there's a need for a sexual counter-revolution. What's your prescription?
I think we're seeing it. Look at the Me Too movement. It really can be interpreted as women saying, we've had it. We don't want to be pawed. We don't want to be sexually harassed at work. We want to be treated with respect. if they could just up their game a little bit and recognize that the hookup culture and this sort of anything goes sexual ethic that our society has inherited from feminism and the sexual revolution, maybe they would realize that women can regain some of that autonomy and sexual power that they unwisely tossed aside years ago.
Mona Sharon, thank you for joining us, author of Sex Matters, How Modern Feminism Lost Touch with Science, Love, and Common Sense. Thank you again.
My pleasure.
We have a glimpse at what it's like to be a young Catholic participating at the Synod. And you can see the participants are having a joyful time with each other and getting some one-on-one time with Pope Francis, all while taking the Pope's challenge to be protagonists at the Synod seriously. Speaking of Rome, that's where our executive producer Susie Pinto is. Before we go, it's a big birthday for her. She is there visiting and working this week. So we surprised her.
Okay, Father, we ask your blessing upon Susie as she celebrates her birthday, the great gift of life.
And asked Cardinal Napier, our guest earlier in the show, if he would give her a blessing. And of course, he complied. Happy birthday, Susie. Come home soon. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.